Tall Tales. The Nymph Symphony.
Chapters.
Chapter 15. Underbelly. "You hungry?" asked Anera after only the tiniest of naps, turning herself around to face the ceiling as if already bored. Despite the 10-second duration, we had only been comfortably lying there for. "They have the coolest bars in the next floor up, you know," she then added, attempting to convince me to continue exploring this place. "Anera, I really don't think it's wise to go back out there. We've been lucky so far, but I don't want to push that luck." "Not even for dinner? Come on, you won't regret it, I promise," she replied with a sprightly and upbeat reaction, yielding the confidence of someone who already knew she was going to get things her way regardless, yet jumping over and onto my bed to crash and bounce on it annoyingly, simply trying to disturb my peace long enough for me to give in and falter. "Look, just because you removed one letter in your name doesn't mean you're no longer a princess. What if someone here eventually recognizes you? It's just dinner, Kaya. Besides, isn't it easier to hide a tree in a forest? Would it not raise more attention if we stayed locked away in this room, making every other resident think we must be protecting something important? If we're willing to start over it," she stated, still trying to convince me. "If you want to talk about being safe, then the safest thing we can do is go out," she said with a smirk and grin. My unrumbling stomach was convincing me more than what she said herself as I eventually nodded in exhausted approval. "But just dinner," I then had to emphasize. My cautious words never enough to dim her spirit as she jumped up in an instant, trying to take the keys from the side coat pocket I was wearing, impatiently hurrying me up from the bed as she moved over towards the door to wait. So Anera and I left Vala in the room to sleep and made our long way through the dark and secluded Valley of Kings and back into the submerged corner cave pockets of the sunken temple's bedrock level. Anera was always pacing ahead as I walked up the corner stairs and linger, following her as she kept her eyes to the roof, chasing one particular unlabeled marking above our heads. The markings she followed were dark and hard to see, without any glare of flash, unlike all the others. Those dim imprints were only scratched onto small handcrafted wooden signs or embedded into guiding arrow labels placed on the darker areas of the wall. It was some strange wavy symbol of two long thin sea snakes wrapped around the same wooden stick or staff while they both ate each other's tail in a figure-8-based coil. Perhaps it was a metaphor or message that I didn't know or care enough to understand. But, nevertheless, and whatever it was clear enough to me that it was not meant for tourists or newcomers to the city, and must lead to some type of hidden dive bar meant only for staff and regulars. And so, at the point of being lost from the endless dark twists and turns of the underground sealess seafloor, we entered a bunker-like pit, very similar to the cave pockets of the floor we came from. We walked down wooden planks to enter the wide, dark, and dank Underbelly bar. Designed to maintain its patrons' anonymity, the bar was already packed with miners and pirates, most of them standing crowded around the bar, leaving many of the corner seats empty. At the front, there was a stockpile of green and brown glass bottles, filled with varying liquids and collected from settlements around the known world, appearing a bit like a place one would use for an alibi, if not the very same place where shady deals were also waiting to be schemed. This establishment didn't appear to have the funds for bottling fancy fluorescent bugs like phytoplankton and glowworms, nor did it have the flattering streetlight shine that was apparent throughout the rest of the upstairs levels of this pyramid. Instead, there were candles scattered all across the walls and roof via unbalanced chandelier frames, lighting the bar in a dim glowing sway as they rocked under the commotion of the loud voices and chuckles throughout the bar. And although it was dark and muggy, I had to admit it was a pretty cool-looking den. It had lounges, chairs, booths, and standing tables everywhere, yet the bar was open like a dance floor that patrons all stood around, chatting to each other while they waited for their food and drink from the front. Hosting waitresses were walking around in corsets and fishnet stockings, wearing makeup made to mimic scales and complete the bar's scandalous scene and theme. I spotted a small booth in a corner, under one of the few sturdy-looking chandeliers. "Over there," I said, pointing it out, thinking it was the perfect dim spot to hide us away so that we could eat our meals in peace. Disagreeing, however, the princess pointed in the exact opposite direction, pointing right over towards the crowded bar and smiling at me in suggestion that we go there instead. Whether teasing or serious, I shook my head all the same, and then dragged her towards the booth I wanted instead. Someone here had to be the buzzkill, and I was going to remain adamantly strict about avoiding as much attention as possible, as, despite that skill set coming naturally to my friend, for Anera it was so hard for her to do. Because, quite simply, she was just somebody who didn't ever want to be invisible. Without protest, she abided with what I wanted, walking over into the darker area without much restraint. Just as we dropped down into the booth with Anera and I sitting across from each other, Anera's friend Axel spotted us and began making his way over. He was still in the same scrubby work clothes as we saw him in before, having headed here straight after work, so it would have seemed, bringing with him a work friend who stopped politely in front of our booth, waiting for an invitation to sit down, unlike his stumpy associate, who dropped down on my side of the booth to face Anera on the other side of the table. Axel's friend was tall and stocky in build, another man in his mid-20s, someone who could have been easily mistaken for a waiter if it weren't for the similar work jacket to Axel that he was wearing. Holding a tray with 4 beverages upon it, this man remained quietly standing by the table as he awkwardly waited for his friend to make the introductions. I could tell he was clearly less confident than Axel, but was also considerably more polite. He eventually placed the tray with 4 mugs of fermented honey down on the table. Back home, this jug would have cost more than my parents' farmhouse, Axel joked. And here, it's cheaper than rainwater. So it's my shout tonight, ladies. Treat yourselves, he said while he waved for his friend to sit down already, the princess and I both looking at him and then at the table seat as a means of silent approval. You say that, but how often does it rain down here? I replied in kind, making him chuckle slightly, as if it weren't meant as a form of witty slander. Never. They import it, he said. I guess the price of things depends solely on where you live, he added, only then realizing by the lack of communication that he hadn't introduced his friend yet. So this is Jax. Hey there, Jax then said with a small wave. He works flight tech with me, Axel explained, leaning back in his seat and letting his gut out slightly. He's a good lad, and I trust him to help you girls out tomorrow, he stated, slapping his mate on the back in a boastful kind of slapping. He happens to be one of the very few workers here who can interpret the dams and find you suitable transport to where you want to go. Free of charge, of course. All thanks to me, he then added in boast, kindly offering out his friend's services on his behalf. Well, thank you very much, I said to Jax with true sincerity in my voice, quietly wanting to ask what the dance he referred to meant, but interrupted by Axel long before I could. Now, who are you again? He said to me, wiping his nose on his already filthy sleeve as he turned to look at me beside him. Kaya, I politely replied. It's nice to meet you, he said welcomingly, although extending out his slobbery hand towards me to shake. Thrilled, I quipped with subtle sarcasm, lightly shaking his hands by the fingertips before discreetly wiping my hand against my coat. She's my best friend, Anera added, trying to divert attention away from my disgust after having shaken such a slimy, gross hand. So, where would you two like to travel? Jax asked. The Crystal Caverns, Anera and I said in unison. Axel and Jax began exchanging a look similar to that of parents worried about their children, their immediate thoughts going to that of naive teenagers who were on the hunt for fool's gold, which fortunately for us, happened to be a perfect cover story of sorts. Well, quite the little explorers, aren't you two? Axel remarked rather mockingly. Trying to strike it rich and live out the rest of your days like princesses? He then said with a sullying laugh, slapping Jax on the back of the shoulders quite boldly again, as though trying to include him in a combined mockery of us. The true irony being if he only knew who his friend Anna really was, then he would know she was a princess, and that we both already lived in a magnificent castle. Hey, I'm not judging. That's why I came out here too. I planned to go there myself not so long ago. Make a little money, build a nice castle, be a princess, all of it, he condescendingly joked. What my associate means to say is that the caverns have been locked shut from some time now, ladies, Jax intervened politely. Someone literally built a giant steel door in front of the main entrance, locking out everyone from entering inside. So I'm sorry to say it, but you might have wasted a trip, he then said, while Axel loudly began glugging down more of his drink, still holding a smirk of humor over his face. Do you know who by? I inquired. Not sure really, but it's one pretty thick door. Axel gargled out towards us between sips. Yeah, I can't imagine it was built by only one man. Dax added. But that was decades ago, girls. How haven't you heard about that? He asked. Neither of us talking but merely looking to each other, our suspicions of Midas living there becoming more and more valid as the boys continued to explain. Well, we're not exactly from around here, Anera admitted. So you mentioned your brother is out there trying to mine it, though. Foolish treasure seekers always thinking it's easy as just rocking up there with a pick and shovel. Axel said as Nair and I nodded, going along with the story he was happily creating for us. Yeah, pretty much, Anera responded, moving to sip some of her drink. Well, I'm sure he's fine, Dax reassured us. So how do you know Anna? I asked Axel, taking the first sip of my drink, the taste of it like an explosion of sourness, but becoming sweeter and nicer with each smaller sip thereafter. It was something I could imagine only royalty drinking. A forbidden fermented fruit. I could understand why some people would get addicted to it. Enough of a taste-testing experience for me that I had momentarily forgotten that I'd asked Axel a question, and he was midway through explaining. Then drafted into the Queen's army, and obviously I didn't want to go, but at the time I was too young and dumb to know what desertion really meant, he said before taking one last chug to finish the bottom of his drink before burping and continuing. So then I ended up in her dungeons, convicted of treason and sentenced to meet the gallows that very afternoon, he recounted. That bitch of a queen said it was so I wouldn't inspire others to do so. He bitterly then mumbled to Jax, clearly still holding heavy resentment upon the bitch queen he spoke of. As only then did I suddenly realize that Axel was once from the borderlands, and it was actually Anera's mother who he was talking about. Anyways, so I had given up and already accepted my faith, and was waiting to meet my reaper, he said with a pause again, trying to take another sip of his mug, forgetting he had finished it already. But then a child appeared right beside my cell. Some sneaky little servant girl who handed me the keys to my cage and told me exactly which tunnels to take and escape, he said, smiling towards Nara as he retold his crazy tale. And even after all these years, I still have no idea how you got down there without being caught yourself, or why you would bother to risk your life to save mine, he continued. But as I said back then, I will never forget that I owe you my life, he sweetly and passionately said, looking to Anera. A sense of vulnerability in his voice, much like a pledge, the first time I saw something of an honest quality within him. If you get us on one of those big cornus beasts tomorrow, then you can finally call it even, okay? The princess stated directly towards her gloomy friend, finding enough favor in him to want him to know that this would clear any debt he believed he still owed her, rather than simply saying, "You're welcome, any time." Axel, I'm really sorry to hear that, I interjected shortly afterwards, speaking directly to him sympathetically. It's really sad that you had to leave your homeland, I added, feeling a great sense of pity for him, knowing just how easily that could be me in his shoes, if I didn't have some small amount of friends and favor in the capital to keep me from a similar fate. Haha, are you kidding? Don't be, Hilalion abruptly announced, stealing a sip from Jax's mug, if only to mask a small insecurity by exhibiting some fake sense of cockiness and pride. Unlike you two, I'm finally free of that place, free of a tyrant queen, and the psychopathic suck-up of a king, he ranted. I'm free from having to grind and grit my teeth while watching the next glass cannon step up and take the throne, he added, Anera and I keeping ourselves respectfully silent and composed while he belittled the entire royal family as loudly and carelessly as possible. Come on now, be realistic though. I get your despise for the queen, but they ain't all that bad, I defended, discreetly poking fun at him as I glimpsed towards Anera across the table, amused at how he could have just spent a full minute explaining how amazing the princess was, only to call all her family inept in their duties to rule over their domain. I mean, I can't imagine it's easy to keep an entire kingdom safe, considering all the roads that need to be constantly patrolled for predators. Not without having the problem of being a little too strict at times, I said in a subtle defense of my king and future king alike, wishing to defend Anera's family honor on her behalf, although slightly afraid that I might have been compromising Anera's clever ruse while doing so. But after having already fueled the fires of the discussion to continue, The real truth was I felt like a complete hypocrite for the very words I was saying, recalling having said something very similar to Arlo's face not so long ago. The problem with the royal family isn't that they're strict, it's that they're all self-destructive. I was then surprised to hear Axel so coherently banter back in steady debate. "All right, I think you're being a tad dramatic now," said Jax, simply trying to diffuse the growing tension of two stubborn opinions. During all this, absurdly enough, Anera was the only one who remained suspiciously quiet, almost as if she had no argument to make in her family's defense. Perhaps even some actual acceptance in what the venting stubby man had to say concerning the matter, allowing him to simply soldier on unrestrained by guards, his words reverberating like war drums that could have easily rallied an uprising. That is, if he had a big enough audience to hear it. "To be fair to your beliefs," he then pressed on to say to me, "I get the appeal and why you might believe in them while the sun is always shining upon their kingdom. But they have no idea how to actually lead a society, and it's not like I'm the only one who thinks these things. Your next prince, for one, he's just another brain-dead berserker who likes to play war, and that's not exactly going to help him when it's his turn to take over and rule," he quipped, pleased with how well he'd phrased his statement. "Quite frankly, your entire homeland was doomed the very second the strong began bullying the smart." "You almost sound as though you know someone who could do better," I assertively then asked towards him, the conversation becoming most real to me right then and there, seeing as the very way he seemed to talk was quite evident of someone who was once loyal to Midas, or perhaps even still loyal today. "And don't say yourself," Dax cut in, making us all briefly laugh at his expense as he once again tried to mediate this debate to ensure such politics weren't going to create offense to anyone here. "Of course not," he ridiculed. "But right off the top of my head, there is one person I think still could. The ex-king they first got rid of," he passionately divulged. "There was no borderlands before Midas came along. Your entire society was a sinking ship before he went around uniting the main tribes with all of his clever machines and devices. And although no one dares even to talk about it anymore, the crown has been falling apart ever since his exile. I mean, it only took 4 years after he left for the war with the Gnoll tribes to start," he stated. "Yeah, his war," Anera finally sniped, unable to keep out of the discussion any longer. "How sure are you about that?" Axel pressed, a small sense of attachment in his tone, a new certain level of seriousness in all of our eyes, the sudden realization we were fraternizing with the enemy. "Fairly certain," I replied to a stillness lingering all across the table. "I think the world is a bigger place than you two girls realize," Axel then remarked. "But I'll tell you one thing," he continued, leaning forward as if about to dazzle us with some grand secret, his passion for being insightful and dramatic giving him a certain thrill as the tension seemed to ease into a sense of curiosity rather than threat and foreseeable calamity. "So, rumor out here has it that Midas' son is still alive and lives in the kingdom. A nobody without any name or title, but someone around the right age who is just as smart and talented as his father ever was, which would make him the fittest leader to rule the kingdom in his father's stead. So really, the only true hope the Borderlands has relies on some nervous little dweeb coming out from the shadows and having the balls to challenge the next king in order to reclaim his rightful place on the throne," he announced, the lot of us sinking back into our seats as silence brewed again, pretending that we were processing his insightful understanding of current worldly events. "Do you think you will sing tonight?" Jax asked Anera out of the blue. "Axel told me you were one of the best he's ever seen," he stated graciously, trying to change the dimming mood. Breaking the quietness that slowly ensued while Anera and I both took the silence to scout out the board above the bar that had the limited dinner menu on top of it. I was a little surprised to learn Anera had once got herself up on the stage by the bar and had done such a daunting thing as sing to a crowd of strangers before. Although I wasn't exactly sure why I thought it was strange, considering it seemed like a pretty brave and typical thing for her to do. "Come on, Anna, please," Axel pleaded. "Oh yes, Anna, please do," I impulsively added on top of the two boys' pleas, looking to her with a mix of both fear and amusement about the prospect of seeing her do something so courageous. "You're so much better than all these pretenders," Axel proclaimed. "Have you heard her sing before?" Axelden asked, turning to me. No, not in a crowded place like this." "Well, I hope you get a chance to, because there is nowhere else like this," Jax proudly said. "This is where all the entertainers come to pay homage to our aquatic ancestors," he said in both historical and religious education. I had never heard of it myself, but what he was saying did make a lot of sense. Much of the Hotel Capricorn complex I had seen so far was built to look like an ancient siren temple. It was clear that music, song, and dance were big deals here, as it was a place of all races and cultures to congregate together without prejudice. A center stage for all of the most talented musicians to broadcast themselves and spiritually pay tribute to the forefathers that dared leave the ocean and adapt to live upon the land, as the forest nymph sprites we are today. After all, for a dark pirate cavern, there was also a sense of spiritual enlightenment that seemed to link this place with the species before us, the concept that song could once again be used as a tool to master the art of persuading one's mood and mind. It was a privilege to be shown this place as, based on Anera's smiles about my wonder of this place, I could tell she really wanted to take me here and show me all the places she had already seen and been to herself. Making more and more sense why all these barmaids and young waitresses came to work here through the night. They were all part-time singers coming here to fulfill a lifelong achievement worthy of the danger and travel. To stare out before all the drones and grunts in the crowd and pay homage to the forerunners that made us, by trying to relearn how mermaids used to lure their myrmidons inwards in order to turn them into their enthralled slaves. Before long, we had already finished eating. Midnight fell upon us, as time seemed to roll on without measure or control, the vibe in this place being both enthralling and timeless as, in but a few hours, the four of us grew quite comfortable with each other and other strangers' company. We'd eaten dinner and got up to refill our cups and take bathroom breaks. Anera, the cheeky devil, had walked off to greet staff she knew from her previous travels. I watched her even steal a dancing man's hat from his head, asking to keep it for the rest of the night, just so I would stop worrying that someone might eventually recognize her. Jax and I idly chatted the later the night got, the rowdiness of the bar seeming only ever increasing. By the time I got to talk to him one-on-one, we had to shout just to be heard over the background noises. Some arguments at corner tables beside us eventually turning into brawls, causing us to occasionally duck to avoid being hit by flying glasses and pirate boots. I realized the environment had become way too dangerous for the princess and me to remain in, but I was enjoying myself and simply wanted to stay a bit longer. "So what did you two mean before by the dance?" I asked Jax curiously as Anera returned to the table with a fresh glass of honey and some garlic-spiced bread. "You really don't know?" he excitedly responded. "See, the hornets that live here can't talk to us, but they can communicate in other nonverbal ways, mostly just through suggestion or dance," he explained. "And we're all experts of dance here," he boasted. "Really?" I asked, amazed by it all. "Well, most of us, some also just pretend," he joked, pointing to his oafish colleague as he spilled his drink, toppling over other patrons while dancing near the bar, scaring off all the waitresses and female patrons he had in his sight. It takes years to actually understand the patterns, but once you do, you can hear the hornets' stories, as if they were singing them right there for you, he elaborated with a cool wonder and confidence to his tone. "Wow," I said, genuinely impressed. "That's amazing," I said in compliment, truly amazed with both him and his townsfolk. The night continued with laughter, cheer, and joyful tears. Nymphs shouted toasts to their friends in celebration as drunkards jumped onto tables to convey their brotherly love for one another. Before long, I was in the center of the crowd chanting and singing each segment of their beloved sea shanties, no different than all the other rowdy locals had been doing since the start of the night. The bar floor came to life with dance. I began to trust the strangers that sat at either side of me and took a leaf out of Anera's book, trying to fit in rather than stand out, realizing how much friendliness protects you when you are so far out of your comfort zone. It was a big step for me, but I started approaching strangers and talking with them, feeling as though I was now a rightful member of this bar. This place brought out in me a thrill for fun and a sense of freedom that I had long since lived without. I had not forgotten the dangers of the real world, as for the first time ever, I was able to put my fears aside, rather than let them rule over me and make all of my decisions for me. Overcome with an empowering new confidence, I sat along a young waitress as she and a few other nymphs pleaded with Anera to get up on the side stage bar. I cheered along with everyone else as they jumped up to sing. Normally, I would have shaken my head in disapproval, but I didn't want to be a buzzkill anymore, nor draw attention to myself by being the one person arguing against the crowd. The bar quieted down as Anera began to sing a softer sea shanty, backed by a pianist and harp players. It was a song about a sailor that had been sung time and time again by men earlier, but Anera made it her own, changing its mood and meaning by being the very first woman to sing the tune, altering the story to something of her own making. Her talent was nothing short of miraculous, a true natural entertainer. The whole tavern began to sing with her, while banging their mugs on the table to create a progressively increasing beat. We were stranded, left out all alone, this damned crew, another dark cove. In deep waters, the tide rose, the reefs enclosed, so far from anything. Oh, I never thought you would know. And if only I knew what this would one day bestow. You loved me. Yet in another I dove, so I'm sorry, so sorry, for what was never meant to be, but that rhythm, that melody, that nymph and her symphony, so slowly taking hold of me. So I'm sorry, so sorry, for making you believe in me, but that rhythm, that harmony, that heavy heart calling out to me, the recipe for this catastrophe. It was beautiful and resonating. That one chorus I had heard countless times before suddenly became a life-changing story now that it had been sung by Anera in her own clever and unique way. The song itself was a remorseful recount of wrongdoing, an ancient tale of love lost through sin and the unachievable atonement that comes from seeking true forgiveness. A song of a siren who enslaved a man's free will with an echoing cry, powerlessly enthralling him and forcing him away from the woman he loved. An old wives' tale that spoke of the powers our sea nymph ancestors who lived under the sea long ago once possessed. At least that's how I'd always interpreted it to be, but now, after hearing Anera's version, I realized nothing could have been further from the truth. The song was more detailed than that. It wasn't mindless music or a melodramatic fable. It was a metaphor about the failure to admit fault in one's own character, an epiphany over the inability to resist temptation, and almost an apology from someone seeking forgiveness after sensing something unspeakably wrong within themselves, and yet not having the willpower or strength to stand up and stop it before it became too late. The morality of one's inner vulnerability and the weakness that drives one's soul into losing their self-worth and integrity. The ballad made me think about Arlo, and how he'd chosen someone else over me, a girl he most likely loved. And, if I was to try and contest her union, to ruin what they had because of my envy, I would be no different to the siren who took a man's free will away from him. Immersed among the fanatic crowd, who were all still mesmerized by the talented young singer, I began to shake off the philosophical spell entrancing me, remembering the risk of where we were and deciding it was best if we left soon and returned to the safety of our cheap desert inn. But, for that moment, I was lost from reality, all the way up until it was too late. It was bad enough Anera had allowed her hat to come off, the only thing hiding her identity after she'd pulled down her hood. But with an exposed face to the crowd, her quick attempt to bend down and pick up the hat allowed the tiara, which had been tucked away in her coat, to slowly slip and fall upon the sticky drink-stained floor. In a panic, I rushed to retrieve it, swiping it up as Anera finished her dance and got down from the stage. Everyone clapped and celebrated her performance, just as I was amazed that no one seemed to have noticed what had fallen to the floor. Having been too preoccupied with Anera and her antics, I noticed two cloaked smugglers looking towards the princess and me, trying to depict if she was who they thought she was, the queen's treasured daughter. These two smugglers took a long glance towards Anera, clearly recognizing her face as she tried to carelessly spin and dance along with the whole entourage of pirate fans coaching her on. We were blundered by the upbeat rhythm circling around us like a cage. I quickly but subtly grabbed her and yanked her away, hoping smugglers might leave us alone if we simply walked away from them. I pointed and illustrated to her that we were in danger as I escorted her back to the booth to get our stuff. I saw the smugglers pushing through the crowd towards us and quickened my pace. Anera's hand slipped from mine and I turned back. One of the men appeared in front of me, as the other blocked me from behind. "Where is she?" the smuggler in front of me demanded, breathing on my neck while exposing his broken and disgusting stained teeth. The man bumping me against another even bigger man who was blissfully dancing. I was about to ask that dancing man for help when he was suddenly punched forwards by an invisible patron, while the smuggler in front of me had his hand yanked into the air and had it forced into a fist. And just like that, the devious princess sparked a bar fight, turning happy dancers into brawlers, nymphs of short fuses being very easy to manipulate, as her and I avoided the aimless punches being thrown about by the crowd, soon dodging chairs and bottles being hurled. Everyone was too distracted with fighting to notice us slip back to our booth, where we quickly went to find Jax and Axel, believing they were still there. "I know you," another aggressor indicated from behind me, speaking in a clearly ominous type of reform. "Sit," another demanded, discreetly revealing a knife tucked in his belt. Hands up, my pulse was jolting in a stiff surrendering danger, Anera realizing her mistake as she could very well disappear, but it would mean leaving me here, cornered, with no ability for joint escape. Anera and I were trapped, stuck stranded in the same booth seat with no obvious way out. Jax and Axel were out of sight, as it was still simply too loud and chaotic for us to call out for them. A large group of 5 aggressors moved to sit down, and in my fright, I reacted. A tall, thin shadow image of each smuggler appearing right before them, stealing the available seats. My mystics having been subconsciously activated again. Half a dozen strong reflective shadow soldiers were suddenly there at our defense, just sitting and staring at the smugglers with their ghostly and faceless dark visages. "We're full," I growled. The scare tactic worked better than I would have thought, with the 5 of them jolting backwards, cowering from the table. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. Now everyone in the bar was staring blankly at us, with the bar brawl having ended in an instant silence. They were all looking to me and only me, as if I were a witch in need of burning. Axel and Dax pushed past everyone to get to us. "We got to go," Axel yelled, grabbing Anera and me and racing us towards the exit, everyone moving their heads as they sat still in silent watch of us, every patron too stunned to move. Dax and Axel having to shuffle us past a couple of them as we went up the stairs and out of the door back into the underwater-themed platform level. Anera then broke through Axel's hand grip so she could storm back in to face the crowd all alone for one last round. "I'm keeping your hat," she then shouted in a stubborn childish pout, a sentence that would have been a lot lighter and comical if it were not for the obvious danger we still faced at the present time. "Don't do that again," Dax voiced cautiously to me as he ushered us quickly around corners, heading towards the sub-basement's next level of stone stairs. "What did I do?" I asked, scared and confused. "Nothing. It's just a real bad omen out here, okay? People already have enough reasons to fear the dark," he added while him and Axel continued to escort us down into the sandy tier level and towards the Valley of King's sand track. "What's so wrong with it, though?" I asked Jax, only moments later. "They're just superstitious as all, Kaya," he replied, still pacing us away from the bar. "Don't sugarcoat it for her," Axel then said to his blunt but honest friend, overhearing us. "Shadow casting is a devil's gift. Everyone knows that." Axel then enlightened towards me, not giving any hint as to whether he and Dax knew about Anera's true identity yet. Seeing as the bar incident had been caused over what I'd done rather than everyone learning who she truly was. One save, we stopped by the first incandescent guidepost statue, before diverting down the Twin Canyon sand passage towards her secluded desert inn roadhouse. "So, anyway, thanks for the night out, boys. I didn't know about y'all, but I certainly had fun," Anera said towards Axel, smirking and giggling mostly as a nervous reaction, seeing as she was never able to take anything dangerous as serious at the time. "Was it now, princess?" Axel said towards Anera in an ambiguous tone. "So it's Anera." He then continued, ending her fun as her expression softened with a sentimental remorse. "I did want to tell you," she truthfully confessed, realizing the seriousness of her deceit. "What your mother did to me was unforgivable," Axel angrily declared. "Axel, Children shouldn't be punished for their parents' actions, I stated defensively. Anera and I waited in silence to see what Axel would do to us, now that he knew the truth. I trust you'll make sure your brother will do better then, he finally said, dissolving the building tension. He wouldn't be in danger if he wasn't, I said, vouching for my prince and hoping Axel's words meant he'd keep Anera's secret. It was still good seeing you again, Anera said as she hugged Axel goodbye. Be safe, okay? He finally said, unwilling to move any further along from the entrance post, barely looking at Anera and me before taking his leave. I promise I won't tell anyone who you two are. Dax reassured us, staying a bit longer as he continued to walk with us, looking to me with the same fondness Axel had looked at Anera earlier with. I'd imagine this floor is a little underclass for you girls, he then said, looking around, his words spoken with a certain softness and weakness. Yes, but it's good enough, I answered respectfully back to him. Have a good sleep, okay? I'll come get you in the morning before the first blimps are set to take off, he added before hugging us both good night and well. Good night, girls. See you early morning. Scared we might have made enemies, Anera carefully snuck us back to our room, ready to decompress from a long, eventful night. Hey, Anera, I said to her as she tucked herself into the twin bed below Vala, the overgrown baby nestled in her web above Anera. All things considered, I did have a fun night, and I'm sorry if I ever doubted you about getting us here, I said after dropping down exhaustively onto my bed. And I probably should listen to you a little more, she responded. But be honest, she said, turning on her side to face me. Did you have a bit of fun too tonight? It was different, but yes, I did. I then confessed for a second time before slipping under my sheets and blankets for good. Night, Anna, I said in mockery to her. Night, my demon spawn, she retaliated, closing her eyes as I placed my spinning head on my soft cushioning pillow in order to do the same.